Good morning, everyone. We're continuing with our How to Work with People and working from Swami's book, The Art of Supportive Leadership. So let's start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master Paramahansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, dearest friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. We are your children, making our way as best we can through this world. We depend on your light, on your living presence within, on your constant whispered guidance. Do not leave us to be lost in the forest of our own false desires, but show us the way clearly and truly to come home to thee. Om, peace. Amen. I have to tell you this horrible joke that a friend of mine sent me when he saw that I was doing a class called How to Work with People. He said a funeral home was having an interview with a prospective employee, and they asked him, "What makes you think you would be happy working in the mortuary?" He said, "Well, I like to work with people." It was interrupting my concentration, so now I've imposed it on you. That is, thanks. I will give credit where credit is due to Purushottama. He sent that to me. So, we are in this extremely interesting section, and we'll keep going because it goes on, about what real humility is. And this is like, this is like the second chapter of the book. Leadership is not an ego game, because the ego is what messes us up all the time as leaders. It makes us defensive when we should be receptive. It makes us talkative when we should be listening. It makes us pig-headed when we should be flexible. And it all comes back to, it's just our own sense of self-worth and what I want, and our fears, and all these things just get all garbled up, and we just make a hash of it. Even though we mean well, we just get very confused. So at the same time, sometimes people try to avoid it by avoiding responsibility, or by just never actually committing themselves to put their energy out there. So it's like, I don't want to be arrogant, so I'm just really not actually ever going to use the energy and the creativity that God has given me. It's right there in the Bhagavad Gita. And when they're having this long discussion, which just goes on in the Gita, about action versus inaction, and inaction, and just like it just endlessly. It's very important, and it goes on. And it says, when you restrain your energy, that is not inaction, because the action you've taken is to restrain your energy. So you're not really transcending involvement in the world. You're just expressing your involvement by being determinedly non-involved. And that's not the same as freedom. And when we have fears and concerns that have to be faced, to suppress them is not the same as transcendence. And in the line in the Bhagavad Gita, is after it talks about some of these things, says, of what avail is suppression? Meaning, what will suppression bring you? Because the problem is not solved. It's just buried. And so you have the fundamental issue, whatever that might be, which is whatever that might be, the fundamental issue. Then you have a complex on top of it, which is the necessity to never expose it. There was a very interesting thing that happened at Ananda village in 1972, which is way back at the beginning of it. And there was this man who happened to be somebody that I had even known from before I came to Ananda, who was very, extremely talented, brilliant person, very magnetic in countless ways and had just many, many abilities. Had been really, really brought up with extraordinary opportunities in his life. You know, everything, a very fine person. And tender-hearted, kind, all that. And he became, in the very early years, when there were really just a few people besides Swamiji who had a position of leadership, he had a position of leadership, of spiritual leadership, I mean. And in 1972, Swamiji left for 2 months. He went to India. Ananda started in 1968, and 1972, 4 years later, was the first time Swamiji had ever left for an extended period of time. So he went away for 2 months to India, and there was also this sort of slight feeling, would he just go into seclusion and never come back? There was kind of a lot of energy, and he left in November and was gone through Christmas, which is a big holiday season. And he left this man in charge, rightly so, because he was, well, let me put it differently. This man was in charge of all the guest programs and where the retreat. But he also, because he was a brilliant musician, he just played a very significant role in the community. He was married, and unfortunately, he had unresolved issues in terms of women. And so, in his position as the face of Ananda in front of all the guests, he attracted a lot of attention. He ended up having an affair with one of the guests, which, you know, is not such a great thing to do. And it was the first time anything like that had happened in the community. We've grown up a lot since then. As Swami says, you know, these things happen. You can't always control the feelings of the heart. And it's not that Swami approved, but he had a much more mature understanding about how life flows. We were exceedingly inexperienced. So the thing came out into the open during that time that Swami was gone. And the response among a handful of people was a sort of vigilante, just like, how dare you kind of energy, how dare you? And they confronted him, and it did not go well. And the man was very proud, and he did not appreciate being confronted. Anyway, blah, blah. So then then things just deteriorated. It got to be really messy. And Swami returns. And the vigilantes expected Swami to praise them for protecting the reputation of the ashram. And Swami's response was, he says, you went after a gnat with a baseball bat. He said, this is a good man who has a certain weakness. He said it needed to be handled sensitively in order to help the man go forward. When someone falls, you don't want to pick up a club and beat them into the earth. You want to ask, what can I do to help you? And I don't mean to say to excuse you, to justify you, you know, to sort of cover up, none of that. The question is, you have fallen, you've slipped at least. How can I help you? And then Swami did his best to basically save the man's spiritual life, but it was too late. The damage was done, and the man wandered off, and depending on who you ask, whether the rest of his life worked out as well as it could have or not. But what Swami said, and here was the most interesting part about it. I mean, well, there were many parts that were very interesting. He said, I knew he had this weakness. He said, I knew it was in him. And he said, but it was his destiny to face it. He had to face it. He said, I would not have served him by trying to protect him from this karma. This karma had to be faced. And then Swami said so sadly, I just didn't expect to be 10,000 miles away when it came up. But he knew. And so what I'm saying by this is, when we are put into positions of leadership, it's because we have karma that we have to face. And if that karma is the temptation created by our public role, if that karma is the possibility of pride, power, wealth, there's just all kinds of things that once you get into a position of leadership, you have these opportunities. You can reach your hand out in lots of directions. And if that is in you and it's ripe to be faced, it simply has to be faced. So in yourself or in other people, when you see that circumstances have conspired to bring the karma to the fore, this is not the time to beat them over the head with clubs. And this is the time when we need to help people rise. And, in our society now, for 100 reasons, it's just like, we don't know how to be friends anymore. We've totally lost the capacity to be friends. I'm not justifying the abuses that have been built into our system. I'm not really talking about anything like that. What Ananda is about, in fact, this is one of the things that Swami himself said. He said one of the purposes of Ananda is to show people what true friendship looks like, is to demonstrate what true friendship is. I remember just even in myself, and I didn't understand this quite at the time, I had this very tumultuous relationship with this other woman. I mean, we just couldn't get along. And I remember on one occasion when, I think it was I towards her rather than her towards me, but quite frankly, I can't remember anymore. But one of us did something wrong and therefore was in a vulnerable position, and the other one of us, I'll just say it was me because it could easily have been me, took the opportunity to pound the person down a little farther. It's like, now that we're criticizing you, let me pile it on. And Swami said, when a person is down, that's not the time when you want to pound on them. That's the time when you see that this could be a learning opportunity, but they're not going to learn more for being crushed. You have to think about it. Okay, this is all, let's see, what is this all about? This is all about humility as a leader. So Swamiji says here, not everyone in the world is cut out to be a leader. Even if you're immensely talented, being a leader is not necessarily how that talent should express. I ended up in my life in a position of leadership in a whole community. But it was really actually not natural to me. And it was a very strenuous and difficult period for me for many, many years, which the people who have lived here with me for many years can attest to that fact. The way I put it to myself is I am a creative artist type. And I have, my primary expression has been words, either this, what I'm doing now, or written. Especially particularly written was the more important karma for me, was the karma that I really had to face. But as a creative artist type, and I've just made this up, this is just the way I say it, I like my own ideas. And what I really enjoy are my own ideas. And I come back to the writing, because when I finally was able to start writing, which was only 15 years ago or so, which, considering how long Swami tried to get me writing from the very beginning, but it's only been the last 15 years. And when I was finally in seclusion, working on the first book, I realized why he wanted me to do it, because it's the way I'm made. When you write a book, you can say whatever you want. There's nobody in the room but you. I mean, people don't have to read it. You have to decide whether or not somebody's ever going to want to read it. But I had complete control, and I could just do whatever I felt was coming through me. Whereas for a leader, his artistic medium is other people's energy. And that just wasn't that interesting to me. Now, interestingly, it has become very interesting to me in the last decade, perhaps, and not much before that. Oh, I finally got this idea. But I've been in a position of leadership longer than a decade. So it was just, but it was a karma that had to be faced. And Swami supported me in that. I mean, he never intended to put me in that kind of a position. He wanted me to basically stay home and write. But circumstances, and destiny just brought me to a different one. And so I got to face this karma in this lifetime. It had to come out. And fortunately, I had Swami next to me every step of the way. And so he was able to take me through it. He wasn't 10,000 miles away when everything came apart, as it periodically did come apart. He was there to help me through it. Now, it may be that some people's aversion to leadership is just, they're just not constituted that way. They may have all the spiritual capacity, and the advancement, everything, but they're not constituted that way. But if you find yourself drawn to or compelled into, both ways, then you just figure there's karma for me to face. And I'm going to have to figure out how to do it. That's why Swami says it's much easier to ridicule these ego things than it is to actually overcome them. And we all have to be, in a perfect society, respectful of each other. We're all learning. That's what I was joking yesterday when that man said that I'm not very good at my job. And it's like, that's no surprise to me. I'm not very good at this job because I have a lot of karma I have to work out in this job. And sigh, all of you, my brothers and sisters, are just going to have to go through it with me. But I remember, and now, sorry, unfortunately, I'm not talking about the whole world, but I am talking about Ananda. I remember this was my friend Shivani. This was not about leadership, but she was very ill with a high fever. And in those days, doctors were there. We didn't have any doctors in the community. We were just living in Ananda village way out there. The nearest town was half an hour away, and none of us had cars, although we probably could have borrowed one. And we didn't particularly think about going to doctors. It's funny to me because when I think of this whole incident, it's just like calling a doctor was just like, first of all, there was no phone. It's just like there was no way to think about it. So she had this very high fever, and so I stayed up with her for many hours that night, putting cold compresses on her back, primarily, I think, her back and her head, to just try to bring the fever down. We didn't even take an aspirin. Maybe we were fanatical, I don't really remember. But in the middle of the night, when we're still up and I'm, putting cold compresses, which immediately get hot, and I have to make more and so on, Shivani just thanks me for, helping her. And I laughed. I made a joke because it was the middle of the night and she felt horribly sick, so jokes were a good idea. I would have told her the mortuary joke, but I didn't know it at the time. But I said, money in the bank is how I put it. I said, today I'm helping you, tomorrow you help me. It's like, what's the difference? We're just here to make it work for each other. And part of that is being able to make mistakes, to be able to see them, and then have your people just, instead of taking the opportunity of the feeding frenzy that now they can jump in, to actually try to take you through it. Now, as I say, take you through it does not mean to justify and excuse you and get you off the hook. It means to take you through it, where you're really going to have to face into it and go forward. So, nor should it be supposed that a person's unwilling to lead necessarily marks him as humble, because there's lots of reasons why people don't do it. See, humility is self-preoccupation. Arrogance is self-preoccupation, is having a distorted concept of self. That's why humility is self-honesty. So merely to not do something for a whole lot of reasons, either because we're afraid to do it or whatever it might be, is we are obsessively concerned about ourselves. And humility is self-forgetfulness. Humility is, if it needs to be done, I'm happy to do it. Just like I'm here to serve. I'm not here for self. And excessive worry about oneself is the opposite of humility. So to put yourself down too much is just as egoic. It's not egotistical because you're not pulling yourself up, but it's completely egoic. And what we're trying to transcend is ego consciousness altogether. Refusal to take a position of leadership does not necessarily mark a person as humble, or that another person's acceptance that it is his nature to lead marks him as egotistical. They're just responsibilities. Swamiji, and he'll say it all through this book, leadership is just a job. And it's a job that somebody has to do, and if you're good at it, or you have a karma to learn it, then you have to do it. A friend of mine, she was part of another ashram. She was from the East Coast and had a little bit of that accent. And she spent a lot of her life in that ashram for a long time. She was she just traveled. She didn't live anywhere. She just traveled around their ashrams and gave teacher training programs. Primarily is what she did. But then they had this guest retreat, and somehow or another she ended up being in charge of it. And she just had no talent for that kind of work. She just wasn't good at it. And she was doing a very bad job, even though she tried to do a good job. And finally, I love this, she had a meditation, and in her meditation she talked to her guru, who was in the body, but he wasn't in the room. She was talking to him in her meditation, and she said, "Sir, you want this job done well, you get somebody else. You're content to have it done like this, you leave me in the position, your choice." It was sort of like after that, she just stumbled along and did her best. But okay, so I'm just not good at this. I'll do the best I can. It's God's choice, it's not mine. I mean, that's real humility. That's what I mean. And of course, she was also quite willing to be taken out of it because she wasn't any good at it. Admittedly, creative expression of all kinds requires at least some degree of ego consciousness. It is by creativity, however, that when rightly directed, that we can develop to our own highest potentials. Now there's a whole life study there. There's a whole other book written about that, Art as a Hidden Message. The artist is a channel. It's had multiple names. So creative expression of all kinds requires at least some degree of ego consciousness. You have to be focused and willing to put out energy. You have to be willing to make yourself the instrument. So you have to be self-aware enough to concentrate, to develop your talent, to experiment with your talent, to try. You have to try. But it says, it is creativity, however, when rightly directed, that allows us to develop to our own highest potentials. Now there's a lot more that could be said, which I won't in this moment, but we are meant to become one with the infinite spirit. We are meant to become one with God. That is our destiny. Who is the greatest creative artist in all of creation is the creator of creation. And it is a constant story going on around us, isn't it? It's never the same from one day to the next. One looks at very unusual birds or animals or unusual plants or anything like that, and you think, who made this? Sometimes I think when I see a particularly odd flower, or especially a particularly odd creature, and they tend to be like lizards or bats or things like that are just not, that don't necessarily follow the human model of what beauty should look like. And I think not only what was God thinking, but I think, who is the deva in charge of this one? Like, what kind of a deva would be assigned to this creature, or would, spend their time trying to make this creature's life work? And this is a worldview that I don't have worked out in detail, but I know that there's the fairies and the nymphs and the devas. The devas are the astral beings who make creation happen. And so this creativity, this willingness to be original And original doesn't mean to do something that's never been done before. It means to act from your point of origin without any interfering cross currents of egoic self-concern. So creativity, creative self-expression, is one of the ways we get to learn how to put aside the conflicting cross currents of ego and to tune into the divine power and let that divine power flow through us. Because you don't get there just by sitting there. The energy has its own intelligence. The flow of energy itself brings up. The flow of energy is the increase in the power of the river, which pulls the vrittis into it. So how do those vrittis get drawn into the river? They get drawn into the river when the power of the river is stronger than the circular force of the vritti. And the vritti is the karma. That's where it is. It's like whatever happened to me that I'm clinging to still, that I've built all this energy around, of either I want to be important or I don't want to be important, or I want to have power or I'm afraid to have power, you know, whatever all those things might be. We have a thought in the center that the ego is committed to and defined by. We build energy around that by our repeated actions and our concentration on that point, and it continues to spin and guide and run our life. And then when the power of the river is strong enough, it will just suck all that energy into itself. Sometimes you don't even realize that it's been dissolved. You just suddenly feel freer and lighter. Or you suddenly are more capable of doing something that you struggled to do before. But how does that river increase? Of course, you can do purely esoteric inward practices of kriya and meditation and chanting and all the things that we do on our path. But the other thing that we do on our path, because it is the model that Master and Swamiji set for us, is that we act in this world. But we act in this world not for self-aggrandizement, but so that we can learn how to be channels for what the divine would like to express. Swamiji said, many great and beautiful things in this world never manifest. Many things that God would have manifested in this world never manifest because of the lack of a willing human instrument. That's really interesting, a willing human instrument. And that's why the constant prayer within the context of Ananda is, how can I serve? And Master put great force behind the prayer, I will reason, I will, I will act, but guide thou, Lord, my reason, will, and activity to the right action, right thing in every situation. Now that's what real humility is. It's I will do it. I will definitely do it. But guide thou my reason, will, and activity, rather than I will do it in my way. And this is, this was Swami's great secret that he would tell us over and over again. Put your attention at the spiritual eye, ask Master to help you, and then let him flow through. All right, my friends, God bless you.